Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're well. Just wanted to check in and see that this is working correctly. Just check the tech. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. There we go, a little soundbite of myself. That is good news. All right, perfect. So let's begin, right? So this evening's training, I'm going to be looking at the one thing that's stopping you from quitting. And in this training, we're going to talk about that one thing. And let's just get it right out into the open now, right? It's no big secret, but the one thing that I see from most of my clients that's preventing them from stopping drinking is fear. And I want to share with you some of the reasons why we have fear, when it's useful, and of course, why we've kind of outgrown it almost as well. I think that's really important to see and understand. So there's definitely some good fear in our lives, that's for sure, right? So there's good fear out there, but a majority of the fear that we experience, that we now have, is actually holding us back. And this is not just about stopping drinking. This is about all areas of our life, like where we've not gone for something because of a fear or fears of what might happen for us. So we use fear as a way to prevent failing at something, but all failing is just not meeting that expected outcome, right? And instead, what we do is we look at the fear and we take it literally to heart to say that I am a failure, rather than thinking about it as a lesson to be learned from and trying again and doing it a different way. So I'm going to talk about some of the most common fears that get in the way of people either taking a break or stopping for good. And we're going to shine a light on what some of those fears are. Now, I also think that when we see them for what they are, what these fears are, there's nothing to be fearful of. So we can expose those fears that are pretending to be useful, but they're just wolves in sheep's clothing, right? And in this training, you're going to understand like why that is and what to do about it. So what we're going to get from this is knowledge on fear, why we have it, and then I'm going to give you some tools or ideas on ways that you can overcome it as well. So when or what is it? And why do we have it? So fear is one of the most primitive, natural, powerful human emotions that we actually have. It's like kept us alive for thousands and thousands of years and thousands of years. Some say like up to 200,000 years ago, right, is when the Homo sapien race was really developing. And I like to think about fear as an alert system. It's a way that we get information of any threat or danger, of pain or perceived harm that we're going to be exposed to, right? Whether that's either physical or psychological. And then when we're confronted with a perceived threat, our bodies respond in different ways, right? So the feeling of fear, you may recognize some of these, is that your heart rate goes up, you sweat more, you feel really alert, right? It's like that feeling of anxiety. An example I like to use is think about the meerkat, the meerkat who's in charge of looking after all the other meerkats. He's up on his hill and he's looking around for all the dangers and he's hyper vigilant. He's really looking around, because if he isn't like that, then the result is that they're going to be killed effectively. And that's what we're like as well, right? So that's known as the fight or flight mode. So it's the evolutionary development that's helped us to survive for a very long time, up until right now, and I don't think that will go away either, thankfully. But there is some fear that we need to revisit and overcome, right? Because although we live in a world now where the threat that our ancestors faced, like being eaten by predators like bears or tigers, that was probably far more regular occurrence. Of course, it still happens every now and then, but we don't have to deal with that in our lives, especially if you live in like the city, for example. That just doesn't exist. So we don't have to think about the predators. We don't have to think about going out for food or being outcast from a community, which, back in those days would have meant certain death, because if you're out on your own, you had to fend for yourself. You needed all of your community in order to survive. Yet now our bodies still work in the same way, right, as the early ancestors. And we have the same reactions to our modern day lives. Like, so that fear now has been transferred from the perceived danger of like being eaten alive or something to the bills that we receive, to relationships, to COVID, like as a prime example this year, right? And then also to stopping drinking, the fears that will come with that as well. But we can't physically attack these perceived problems like we would have done in the past. And we can certainly run away from them though. And that, that's the running away from the feelings created by our thinking, and we can do that by drinking, taking drugs, or, anything that kind of takes you out of one emotional state into another. So it could be Netflix, sex, porn, smoking, so many different things, even just looking at your phone. And what happens is we get left with these feelings of fear, right? Like they still are part of our lives, but we've kind of outgrown them. But we still get the scared, we still get the worry, the anxiety. So all of those feelings that in the past that helped us keep us alive, in modern day living, they're like old survival programming, which leaves us fearing for our lives about things that actually are not going to kill us. They're not endangering us. So this is why it's really important to look at your fears and question them. Find out what the brain is trying to interpret a threat as. What are we making those fears mean? Like often in our subconscious mind, the old primitive part of our brain is perceiving things as life or death situations. So something that hasn't even happened and we're making it mean death, quite literally. Like our brain is saying that if we do this, then this will equal this. And we need to get on top of that. So it's no wonder that we want to avoid doing the things we fear in case we interpret them as because we're interpreting them as life or death, right? So what is it that creates the worry and anxiety over bills or COVID, relationships, and stopping drinking? So our own thoughts. We are creating that experience by our own thinking. So we have a thought about how we're not going to be able to pay a bill, and our mind gets busy, goes to work thinking that if we can't pay that bill, it means that we're going to end up homeless. It means we're going to live on the streets. It means we're not going to be able to feed our kids. That's where the brain wants to take you. Or you have a thought that your partner looked at you funny during dinner for some reason, and you make that mean that they now want to split up with you, or they're having an affair with someone, or something's happening that you don't know of. Our brains get really carried away with things, right? Or when it comes to stopping drinking, you think the withdrawal is going to be so bad that you won't be able to handle it, and you're going to feel so terrible that you avoid doing it and keep drinking, which feels even worse. We kind of like contradict our own fears. Now, the human brain wants to avoid pain. It wants to seek pleasure and be efficient at all times. So this is what's known as the motivational triad. And the primitive part of our brain, as I mentioned earlier, that old part, this is the one that we've got in common with our ancestors. Now, in the evolutionary terms, we've got the prefrontal cortex. One moment. So we have the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of the brain. This is where we get all the decision making. This is where we get personality. This is where we get to do all these planning and things like that, which we didn't have before, right? And the brain always wants to be right. It wants to be right. Like whatever we tell it, it wants to be right. So it's designed to sense danger. It's designed to focus on threats. Like our brain's primary function is survival. So our brain like thrives on spotting all the threats and dangers to ourselves. So it's why we end up with such a negative bias, right? Because we're always seeking the worst case scenarios. We catastrophize. So unless we refocus the mind onto what we want, then it's going to go away and do that stuff regardless. So when we're fearful of doing something like not drinking or stopping drinking, we actually tend to do our best to avoid it. Now, this is not something that you should be judging, like something that you think means there's anything wrong with you. It's just how the brain wants to operate. And I think knowing this is really, really powerful, because then you can see that, you know, this is just how the brain has evolved, and this is what we're working with. So even if a fear is completely irrational, the trouble is, like, the more that we avoid that fear, the more that we start reinforcing that it's a valid fear. President Roosevelt once said, the only thing to fear is fear itself. So it's not the thing that we fear so much, it's like what we're thinking about it that's creating the fear for us. So to overcome fears, you first have to find out what they are, right? And to do that, you have to like really look within. You have to raise your awareness, and this is all part of the process. And then you get to decide if that fear is warranted or not. Like, is it really serving you to have that fear? Now, if you are not able to swim and you're near deep water, it would make complete sense that you would have a fear of going near that water, because the result of you falling in would be death, right? That's a logical fear. That makes sense to have that fear. It's keeping you safe. But then if you have a fear like speaking in public, you know, and you think that if you spoke in, and it's the number one fear that a lot of people have, right? It'd be the worst thing in the world. But what are you actually avoiding? Because it's not a life or death situation. You know, you're just trying to avoid feeling a certain way if what you have to say doesn't go down so well, or if people disagree, or if people laugh, or if people mock you, whatever. Like, you'll come away and you'll feel embarrassed or ashamed or humiliated, all which, by the way, are created by the way that you think about what you've done. So the reality is like, your life's not being threatened. Like, you're not going to come into any harm. It just feels like it. And that kind of brings us into our next section, actually. So what purpose does it serve? So we know that we have appropriate healthy fear. We know that stepping back from the edge of a cliff is probably a wise thing to do, right? That's a healthy fear to have. We know when crossing the road, we need to look both ways to assess the danger. This is what we're doing. We're assessing the danger. And we know that going near deep water if we can't swim is a healthy, logical fear. But then there's the irrational, illogical fears that we create with our own thoughts, right? So we go down that path of what if it doesn't work? What if I can't stop? What if they don't like it? What if I can't do it? You know, all of those questions go unanswered, or if all of those questions go unanswered, then your brain is going to go away and going to find all the evidence to support them. So this is why when you're asking yourself questions, it's always good to come up with an answer for it, because then if the answer isn't what you want, then you can reevaluate it, because otherwise the brain's going to go and answer it for you anyway, and you're just not going to consciously know about it. And then to avoid failing, which is essentially what we're doing when we're not walking towards our fears, is because we think that we will fail them. And when we think that, when we fail, like I said in the beginning, like, we make that mean something about ourselves, rather than looking at it from a way to develop. We look at it as it's a problem. It's something inherently wrong with us. So we respond, or like we create so many situations in our lives, man. Like, they're so hypothetical or completely non-existent, right? Like, we start making up scenarios, situations in our minds ahead of anything ever happening, that puts us in a state of fear. Like, this is worry, right? Worry pretends to be useful. And then studies have suggested that, 90% of the fears that people walk around with never come to fruition. It's like waking up in the middle of the night worrying about everything that's going to happen the next day, and then nothing happens the next day. And it's like there's been a lot of time spent worrying about nothing. So being in this state of fear or worry that's what's creating the anxiety. So when you aren't aware of what you're thinking, this is when you're anxious and you can't pinpoint why you're anxious, is because somewhere underneath that is a lot of meaning making going on. Like, your brain is creating lots of scenarios, of situations. It's telling you something about yourself, and it's perpetuates the anxiety. So then this is the kicker, right? Like, you start using alcohol to relieve the anxiety, which ends up increasing the anxiety. And then you use the problem as a solution. So you start using alcohol to solve for alcohol. And this is where you get stuck in that Groundhog Day, effectively. So we have fear pretending to be useful, right? So worry keeps you busy without actually doing anything. And all of this time you actually miss out on going ahead and stopping drinking, or finding out a way to stop drinking. Like, it prolongs the decision making when you are stuck in worry, overwhelm, confusion, or that anxiety. So fear keeps us alive. It does. But many of the fears that we entertain are holding us back from experiencing, like, the life that you both want and desire and deserve. So the next part I want to talk about are the fears of stopping drinking. Like, what are the fears that I see coming up the most? And for me, like, there's a great acronym to remember, and that is for fear, right? So it's false evidence appearing real. So our brain is finding evidence for thoughts that we're thinking about something that's going to happen or not going to happen, and it creates evidence to suggest that it's going to be true. Now, it's an illusion, right? It's something that we fabricate in our own mind. It's a story we begin to tell ourselves to stop doing what we really want, so we can be safe from the unwanted feelings. Because that's it, right? Often we are trying to avoid feeling a certain way. So we have a fear, and I'm going to share some fears right now about not drinking, and our brain goes away and it thinks, actually, I don't want us to experience that. I don't want to process that feeling. That's going to feel really bad. If we feel that, we're going to die. This is kind of like how your brain is working, guys. So we have to stop it in its track. We need to question it. So these are some of the feelings, right, that we are trying to avoid. So the first one is rejection, because being outcast, as I mentioned earlier, would actually mean like literal death. So and our brain still thinks that's true, but it's not, of course. Like, being rejected is actually optional as a thought. Like, the only way you can be rejected is if you think you're rejected. But to be told that you can't go out with somebody now because they don't like that you're not drinking, you feel rejected, you feel like you're being outcast, and it feels like, the brain's making it mean that you're going to die. But really, that's not the case at all. And do you even want to be going out with people who think like that anyway? And then there's the feeling of failure. So feeling like a failure, instead of thinking about having just failed at stopping, for example, and thinking about what you can do differently next time, like what created you to have a drink. What was your trigger? A trigger being a thought, right? What led you to that situation? What can you do to avoid it the next time? There's so much information, and we have a habit of just going to the worst case scenario, thinking that, oh, I had a drink, this means I'm never going to be able to stop. This means that I'm just not going to be able to stop ever, and then just end up going on a bender. And I know I've been there before. Another feeling that we want to avoid is uncertainty, right? But it's kind of ironic, because life is uncertain. Life was created in chaos. Like, think about how the planets came together, just complete chaos, right? And that's the way that it has been, and it always will be. And it's the same for the humans as well, right? Like, there is uncertainty. We just have to look at this year, for example, to know how much uncertainty there is. With COVID and all other things, there's so much stuff happened this year. And the only thing that you can do to have certainty is to control what you're thinking. Like, we can't control everything that's happening in the world, but and the only thing we have control of is how we think about it. And that is where you can get your certainty from. And then the next feeling is loneliness. So when we fear loneliness, it keeps us doing the things that we don't want. Like, we fear being lonely, but we also isolate ourselves through drinking as well. And we don't want to feel lonely because we don't want to feel like we're left out. We don't want to feel left behind. But we only feel lonely when we think we're lonely. And what happens when you're feeling that lonely feeling is that you do things to isolate yourself as well. Another feeling that we try and avoid through fear is change, right? We fear change. You hear this a lot, like, I fear change, or the fear of failure, or the fear of success. But when you're stopping drinking, this is exactly what you're going for, right? You want to change. You want to stop drinking. So the fear is somewhere underneath all of that. Like, you want to stop drinking, you want to change, but what is it about changing that you're fearful of? So that's something for you to explore. Another one for freedom, another one about rejection or fear is freedom, right? So having this freedom and not knowing what to do with it, making up that you don't know how you're going to be able to do it. Next one is judgment. So we judge ourselves, right? We feel judged by others. We fear being judged. If we come out and say that we're not drinking, we fear being judged. If we say that we're going to stop and then we drink again, we fear like what people are going to say about that. But here's the things, guys, like, the only way you can be judged by other people is by how you think about it. So you cannot be judged without your own permission. Like, you get to decide. It doesn't matter what other people say or think, right? You are in charge here. You get to choose how you want to think about it. We judge ourselves enough. We don't want to start letting other people's thoughts judge for us as well, right? Another feeling we try and avoid through fear is being hurt. Like, no one wants to feel hurt or to feel sad. So we use fear as a way to avoid that in like now. So we avoid feeling hurt ahead of time so that we don't have to feel hurt or sad. But again, we use that as a way to end up keep drinking, and actually hurt or sad it depends on the situation, I guess, but that is also in our control. All of these are in our control. And then the final one here is inadequacy, right? So that feeling of not being good enough. Like, this is one of the core limiting beliefs on the planet, I would say, right? Not being good enough. But then when you think about everybody else in the world and you think about how they are, if they're good enough, if they're worthy, then the answer would be yes. So you've got to come back and think, well, if everybody else is worthy, why aren't I worthy? And here's the thing, you are worthy, you are enough, you are deserving. That's always been the case. It always has and always will be. So the only thing that gives any of those feelings power is by believing in them, by experiencing them and making them mean something about who you are. But they are just feelings created by our thoughts. Feelings can't hurt you. What you think about them does. And all of this is in your control. So rejection, failure, uncertainty, loneliness, change, freedom, judgment, hurt, inadequacy, like, these are all optional. They're all created by ourselves. We have complete control over them. And, for each of them feelings, so here's an exercise for you guys, if you choose to accept it, is for each of those feelings, I would say, like, write down what you are making it mean about experiencing them, because this is going to show you where your fears lie in stopping drinking. So when you think about rejection when stopping drinking, like what do you make that mean about yourself? What are you making failing stopping mean about yourself? What are you making uncertainty mean about yourself? If you want to do that exercise, just drop in the comments your name or say I'm in, something along those lines. What I do is I'll create a worksheet for that, because I think that could be a really powerful exercise. Because when you start seeing where you are putting your power in terms of what you think is going to happen, what you think the worst case scenario is, this is where you get to question it. And this is the whole purpose. So every time you drink, you say you wouldn't, you're making it mean something about yourself, right? Which keeps you creating the same result of drinking, because you are proving the thought that you're having. So I'm going to say that again. So like every time you drink and you say you won't, your brain wants to make it mean something. And because your brain wants to be right, it then goes and proves that thought for you. So it reinforces. So this is it, right? If a fear is that we can't stop, then we drink when we said we wouldn't. We then use that as evidence to prove that we wouldn't be able to stop. So the fear grows. Fear grows. So the brain always wants to be right. It doesn't matter what you feed it. It always wants to be right. So we may as well kind of feed it some good stuff, right? And we try and avoid the thing we have complete control over. This is always and everything. We try and avoid the way that we think about stuff, the way that we interpret, the way that we make it mean, because your reaction and what you make it mean is the difference between being able to stop or not. That is the difference. So some of the most common fears I see when people want to stop drinking, let me just check in, see if we've got any questions or anything going on. Not at the moment. If you've got any questions as we go through this, guys, just drop them into the comments and I'll give them a little answer for you. So some of the common fears I see when it comes to stopping drinking are people not believing in themselves, right? Because it's easier not to believe in yourself, because the brain finds that incredibly easy. You know, it doesn't want to be uncomfortable. The brain's efficient. So by not believing in yourself, it gives your brain a way of not actually going out there and doing the work that it wants to do. And the next thing is a fear of detox, a fear of withdrawal, which, you know, when you're fearing detox, when you're fearing withdrawal, like look at it objectively, like it's almost got to take yourself out of yourself to look at it realistically, right? Withdrawal is going to be, depending on how much you drink, right? It's going to be anything from a week to around 4 months that you might experience withdrawal. And when you fear withdrawal and you carry on drinking, you are just, you're keeping yourself in a state that you don't want for even longer, right? So you use like a 1 to 4 week time frame to be fearful of and keep drinking and end up drinking for years and years. And so instead of having a 1 to 4 week withdrawal, and I think 4 weeks is a lot still, but you know, like 1 to 4 weeks where you're not going to feel great, you know, your body's going to be doing a lot of recovering, a lot of repairing, or you carry on drinking and then end up taking years off your life anyway. So it's really just to kind of think about that. Another fear is going to social events, because if you were like me, I prided myself on going out and getting pissed. Like I was a very good drinker and I could drink a lot and I loved going out. And then when I stopped drinking, that all changed, you know, and then I realized that a lot of the people that I was hanging around with was purely because I just wanted to go out and drink with them, you know. And that's not to say I don't see them anymore. I do, but I just realized that there was like a sub layer of what's the word, connection, and that was around alcohol, the relationship. Another thing is about being boring, right? Not being fun. And I see this fear, and you know, it's like, this is an amazing opportunity. This is not something to be afraid of, right? When you stop drinking, you get to decide what you want to do. You get to discover who it is you want to be. You have that whole fun in finding out who you want to be, like what activities you can do, like where you can go. But your brain, right, remember, is trying to tell you that if you stop drinking and you are suddenly boring, it means that no one's going to want to speak to you again, and we feel isolated and lonely. So this is why you've got to like catch your mind out all of the time, because it gets busy. It's going to be thinking the whole time, whether you choose to, whether you want to or not, right? It's going to be thinking. So you've got to be intentional, right? And then another big one is the fear of, who am I if I don't drink? Like, what is my identity? Who am I? So for me, my identity, as I just mentioned, is that I was a big drinker. I like going out to have a drink. They called me pint per minute Pat because I used to drink so quickly. Because that was very ego based for me. I recognized that I wanted to be the one who was drinking fastest, who could drink the most, because that was like a badge of honor for me. So then there's the identity of like, who am I after I stop drinking? That's nothing to be afraid of. That is to be arms wide open and embrace, man. Like, you really get to decide who it is that you want to be. A few other fears we get are like dating, right? So when I go out dating, what am I going to do if I can't drink? Well, you're probably going to realize that a lot of the people that you go out with are probably not your type a hell of a lot quicker. You get to decide that perhaps you don't want to go out on dates with other people who drink as well. Maybe that's what you want. Maybe that is part of your identity. Again, it's all just really for defining for yourself, like, what you want. These things don't end. Many people go out on dates that don't drink. And then, you know, a big one as well is worrying about what other people might say, what people might think about you. You've got this one life, guys. Like, you can't worry about what other people might say about you not drinking, because really, does it matter? Like, they can either come with you or they can choose not to come with you. That's entirely their choice. Like, if you don't want to drink, you've got to do it for you. You can't do it because of other people, because of fear of what other people might say. Another fear is fear of what you have been avoiding in the first place, generally through drinking, right? And that is from experiencing feelings, having those emotions come up for you. So drinking to cover up anxiety or stress, or drinking to give you confidence, right? Like, we fear giving up alcohol means we won't have ways or strategies to cope with those things. But, you know, alcohol actually increases them a lot of the time. And alcohol, you know, there's a fine line between confidence and then just being like a slurring, dribbling mess, you know? Like, when you think you're confident, it's only because you're with other drunk people and they tolerate it. But actually, if you were drinking to be confident and speaking to lots of sober people, it would be a very different experience for you. So confidence comes from how you think, comes from like being prepared to have your own back, being willing to go out and to try new things. That's where we get self-confidence from. And then one of the last fears I just want to mention in this is like the fear of being the one, the fear of being the one that can't stop, you know, being the one who can't help themselves, the one where there's just something wrong. Like, everyone else on the planet, they can do it, but me, you know, I can't do it. You know, that fear keeps you stuck for such a long time, because, as I said, like, your brain wants to keep finding evidence. Carla, I just saw your comment. Yeah, right. You want people talking about you not drinking. How awesome would that be? And that's the kind of mindset you've got to approach this with. Like, not being worried about the people who talk about you drinking. Talk about the people who are saying about you not drinking. How awesome it is that you're doing something that you want for yourself. So there's a story that I see my clients unknowingly tell themselves, which keeps them stuck, right? Keeps them where they are. Not that we're ever stuck, but we, you know, keeps us doing the same things over and over again. And that is, if I fail to stop drinking, it means I'm a failure. But if I continue to keep drinking, I'll feel like a failure. So it's a double bind, right? Like we're so hard on ourselves. The brain's in overdrive. Like we put ourselves into a lose-lose situation. I'll fail if I stop, and then I'll fail if I keep drinking. And this not nice. Like that's where the anxiety comes from. So it's time to change those stories, it's to look those fears in the eye. First, you do that by raising awareness. You've got to understand what it is that you're thinking about what you're doing. And then, once you know what that fear is, then you can start to look at it. You start to question it and, recognize that they're completely changeable, that it's just this primitive part of your brain that's trying to keep you safe. But you can override that system. You can choose to do something different. So, right, as we are now, we're going to go into the last section. Okay, so we know, well, the last section, right? What to do with fear. So this is super powerful to know, guys. Like, fear is a choice, and it's created with our thinking. Yeah, like fear, we are choosing fear, and we create it by the way that we think. Knowing that is so powerful, because then, like, you actually realize that you are in complete control. If that is something you have created with your own thoughts, that's something that you can uncreate. It's something that you can move forward from, knowing that there's like the biological primitive part of your brain trying to keep you safe, but then also being able to lean in and override it for yourselves. So to get there, you got to start raising awareness of what you're thinking about stopping drinking. Then really question the fears that you come up with, right? So what are you avoiding by holding on to them? What are you making those fears mean about yourself? And what are you not willing to experience, and at what cost, by holding on to those fears? These are the types of questions. I'll post these afterwards so you can ask yourselves, right? Like, what are you avoiding? What are you making them mean? What are you not willing to experience, and at what cost? Because these are designed to keep you safe, fears, and there's nothing wrong with that. But keeping safe, but actually carrying on drinking is not what you want at all. So you get to choose, right? So, the brain's going to be happy doing what it does, because it doesn't want to change. When I talked about that motivational triad, it's happy doing what it's doing, even if it's detrimental to you. It thinks it's being efficient. It's avoiding the pain of the anticipated failure of going for a fear, and it's getting the false pleasure from alcohol as well. So the more you feel fear, the more you feed fear by not taking action in spite of it, it grows and becomes stronger, like I explained earlier. And then when you make that decision that you've had enough of fear, it changes the way you think and feel, which sees you taking different actions, because knowing you can experience any feeling along the way, and you're going to be okay. Because the worst thing that can ever happen is a feeling, and we create our feelings. So once you let go of fear, like, anything is possible. It really is. I saw a question. So you have to learn to embrace the discomfort of what stopping brings. Know that you're in control of how you think about it. You act in spite of fear. Every time you do that, you are doing it from a power play position, right? Like, you're showing yourself that you can have a fear but still move forward with it. Because when you start doing that with one fear, then you can do it with another fear. There's nothing wrong with having fear at all. It's good, it's useful, it's information, but it's this buying into fear and not doing anything about it. That's when it becomes problematic, right? So, it's through life's greatest challenges that we find its greatest gifts. We get to show ourselves that what we're made of, like how resilient we are, how creative we are, how courageous we are, and how that can filter out into the rest of our lives as well. So when we embrace the discomfort of what stopping brings, know that you're in control and how you think about it, it's going to be a magical thing. So a quick story before I'm just about to wrap up, guys. A quick story about using fear to help you, that I was just mentioning. My granddad, right? He's 84 or 85 now. he smoked for 65 years of his life. And I'm not talking about the odd one or two, like he was a 60 plus a day man. He used to smoke 60 plus cigarettes for over 60 years. That's a lot of cigarettes. And he had an accident at home, and it was quite bad. Like he cut his foot pretty badly, and it was taking a really long time to heal. And he was having to go backwards and forwards to the hospital, and they were just getting a little bit concerned because the healing time was taking too long. And one day he went to the hospital, and the doctor said to him, he said, it's come to the point now where we are going to have to say that either if you don't stop smoking, you're going to lose your foot, because the cigarettes, the nicotine that was in his system was thinning out the blood. It wasn't giving the blood enough time to clot and to heal. And the consequence was that if he was to carry on smoking, he was going to lose his foot. That day, he stopped smoking cigarettes. He stopped smoking 60 cigarettes that he'd been doing for over 65 years, because the fear of losing his foot was far greater than the fear of not being able to cope with the feeling of not having a cigarette. And isn't that so interesting? Like he managed to override his own system for 65 years, right, of doing the same thing, smoking all those cigarettes. You think, what, like when we don't have a cigarette or a beer and we feel that anxiety because we think we can't cope, but in a second he completely changed it. And this is available to every single one of you, man. Like this is how you can rewire your brain. Now that is like an extreme situation, but you can create mini versions of that for you yourself. And it was similar for myself, like when I stopped drinking, because the day that I woke up and I was like, I'm not doing this anymore, is because the fear I had that I was turning into the person that I said I never wanted to be, it dawned on me. I was like, I am literally recreating what I said I was never going to do. That fear, I was able to use that fear to help me and stop drinking, because I didn't want to show up as that parent and as that influence in my children's life. So, you know, you're not a victim. And I'm just going to wrap up now, guys. So you're not victim to your circumstances. You're not victim to like what other people do, what other people say. Because when you focus on all of them, when you think the problem is outside of yourself, when you think the problem is what your wife going on, or you think it's COVID, or you think it's the relationships, or you think it's the kids, like you miss all of that opportunities, all of those choices that you have in stopping. Because, you know, when you take full responsibility for yourself, fear doesn't stand a chance. It really doesn't. So I like to think fears is an inconvenience, you know, like they're created by our thoughts. We picked them up somewhere along the line to keep us safe, and that's okay. Like that's fine, but you get to choose what you want to do. You get to choose how to move forward from them. You know, like what do you do when there's an inconvenience in your house? Like say you had like a mice or a broken tap, or the electrics go or whatever, right? You don't just leave it as it is. You go out there and you get someone or something or somehow a way to get it resolved, right? And it's the same thing with your fears. Like you find a way to solve for them. So just to finally say, this is a real final wrap up now. So like think about your future, like without alcohol. Choose what you want it to be. You know, it's time to use all your skills, resources, to do something about it. Like let go of the resistance, doubt and worry of stopping, and choose to accept that this is what life will be like without alcohol. This is what you want, you know. And as you do this, you'll notice your fears will move along. You know, they won't be holding you back, and you won't be afraid at all. Fear's part of life. Like as long as you are going for something, it's always going to be there, and that's good and that's okay, because you know you get to go and do it anyway, right? And then, and if you saw in my post, there's a fantastic book you can read called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by Susan Jeffers. I'm actually going to reread it. So that's the end of our training today. I just want to say, you know, thanks very much for being here. Thanks for listening. I really think this is such a great topic to understand, because when you can understand that fear is nothing to be fearful of, you can create amazing changes, man, because on the other side of that fear is the alcohol-free life that you deserve. So that wraps us up. I will just check to see if we have got any questions, and it doesn't look like it. Awesome. All right, guys, thanks very much. Take care, and I will see you all again soon.